Hi, today I'm going to show you how to make a quick and easy tie blanket. I make these all the time and I'm really not a crafty person, so I am confident that anyone can make them. I like to give them as gifts at baby showers, for birthdays, and I like to just have them around my house. My husband loves them. To begin, you'll need a sharp pair of scissors, and they need to be sharp because you'll be doing a lot of fabric cutting and you don't want it to be tougher. You don't want to make it tougher than it is. And you also need 2 pieces of fabric. I like to use fleece because it's nice and warm, and everybody likes to be nice and warm when they're using a blanket. And it's not as stretchy as some other fabrics, so when you cut it, it stays the same shape, and you'll see what I mean when I start cutting the strips. The size doesn't really matter. It all depends on who you're making the blanket for. This particular blanket is for a 15-month-old, so it's about 1.5 yards of each piece of fabric. If I were to make one for my husband, I would probably get 3 yards, and that's a pretty big blanket. If you get your fabric from a craft store, there's always women there to help, and they'll answer any questions that you have. They're very helpful. I just have to point out that this is a nice Wisconsin Badgers blanket that I'm making in honor of the Final Four game tonight, so go Badgers. Okay, the first step is spreading out the first piece of fabric flat on the floor. It doesn't matter which piece you have on the bottom. And the second step is making a cut at the corner. So as you can see here, it's about a 3x3, maybe a 4x4 square that I've cut out of the corner. I do this because it helps when you get to the corners when you're tying. It helps to keep them rounded and not make it so difficult to tie. It keeps the strips lined up nicely. The next step is one of the most time-consuming steps, but it's really not that bad, I promise. You need to cut strips along the entire outside of the fabric. They need to be about, I would say, 3 or 4 inches deep, the same amount that you cut out of the corner. That depth is what you need to cut for the strips, but it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm going to cut a couple here. I'm not going to do the entire blanket to save time. They also need to be about 2 inches wide, the strips, but they don't have to be perfect. They really don't. It doesn't matter. This blanket is very forgiving. It doesn't have to be perfect, and nobody's going to be checking to make sure it is. Okay, so I've got these strips cut out. You can see those. And after that is done around the entire piece of fabric, you can lay the second piece on top. I've got this pretty red piece here, and I've cut out the corner on this one already also. So you need to cut all 4 corners out. And then you need to line it up perfectly. That step is pretty important, to get the edges lined up really neatly. So you make sure that the strips that you cut are lined up. So I've got my edges lined up. If your fabrics end up being a little bit different sizes, just trim the excess from the edges so that it doesn't look that funky. Okay, so I've got the corners cut and lined up, and then I can start cutting the strips on the top piece. Again, try to get them to line up with the bottom strips. It's not a huge deal if they don't, because you can always just cut off a strip if it's an odd one out. It doesn't make that big of a difference. Mine aren't perfectly lined up here, so not a huge deal. Okay, got those strips cut, like so. And after all the cutting is complete, it's time to start tying the knots. I've got some tied here already, and I will tie these ones. Take a bottom strip and a top strip. Doesn't matter how you like to tie your knots, as long as they get tied. I like to do 2, a double knot, because I like to throw these in the wash machine, and they stay tied better like that. So you just work your way all the way around the blanket. I'll try to get this up a little closer for you. Okay, got a bottom strip and a top strip. And I make my first knot, tie it tight, and then I do my double knot. and pull it really tight. And again, I like the fleece because it doesn't stretch or lose its shape or fray at the edges like some other fabrics do. Okay, so I've got my double knots all the way around my blanket. And after they are all tied together, you'll have a nice blanket. I have a finished one here. Nice finished blue blanket. This one is actually bigger because it is one for my husband, so it's a larger one. And like I said, after a couple of them, they're so simple, you'll be a pro. It'll take no time at all. It probably takes me about an hour to finish a blanket. A little less time, obviously, if the blanket is smaller, like for this one, for the baby. And you'll just keep creating them for fun. That's what I do. I really, really enjoy this. So thank you for letting me show you my hobbies.